Look, okay, they're technically not both great pools, so it's totally fine. But we
Listen,
are.
I got the Azumarill,
And that's a winner in your heart.
yeah, exactly. No, I mean, oh yeah, we should.
Yeah,
get started on
we're
this.
heading right into this, so we killed some time. Now it's time to see how what happens here in the top four. It is going to be Alberto versus Aaron. Alberto's team is on the screen for you. There's a Clefly, Corviknight, Garchomp, Chew, Fluttermane, Roaring Moon. If it looks familiar, it should, because it's mostly the team he's been using for majority of the season.
Yeah, and Aaron Brok is using New Balance, and then according to Alberto, this matchup is absolutely terrible, unless it's
For
not.
him or for Aaron?
For
him?
himself. Like the thing is, like Alberto said that, and then he beat Riley and Swiss at Fresno, so I just don't believe Alberto anymore.
It's we call those mind games, and it's called deceiving your opponent before the round starts, right?
Yeah.
But actually, so just quick for people who might be wondering what New Balance is, it is going to be that Chew, Gyarados, Amoonguss, Iron Hands, Fluttermane, and the Tinglu. So no actual like Palafin is what it used to be named after.
Yeah, and what we're seeing here, right, is you might see like Alberto has the Klefki, right, his signature Pokemon, the one that he's gone on CP with, but doesn't come to this matchup. The reason for that is that while Klefki is good for reducing the damage from these big hits, these New Balance type of teams, right, aren't really known for their big hits. It's going to be stuff like the setup with Sword Stance from Iron Hands, and it's like, when you get the Iron Hands up to +6, you don't super care if like if there's a Reflect Up or not.
Yeah, what's kind of funny is that like as we see these formats go from being really fast, they tend to slow down towards the end of it, and like I feel like we've been seeing that a lot with teams lately. We're gonna get into this game one, and whenever this will determine who will go into finals. It's gonna be Gyarados and Iron Hands here versus Fluttermane and Corviknight. So gonna get an Intimidate down into that Fluttermane, but Corviknight says right back at you is gonna actually get the Intimidate down into the Gyarados instead.
Yeah, I mean that's part of like what Corviknight does here. Aaron is going to be really relying on switching from the Gyarados into the Amoonguss, into the Gyarados, etc., and just consistently like reduce any of the damage from the physical attacker, specifically the Roaring Moon and the Garchomp. But what Alberto is doing here is putting on the initial pressure with the Fluttermane and saying, hey, I could Dazzling Gleam for crazy damage here, or I could Protect, and I'm also Focus Sash, so you need to commit 2 attacks if you want to actually remove it. And that's just hard as a mind game to deal with for Aaron, right? Because you don't want to Terra Fire if you don't have to and look like a dingus. But you also want to like be able to remove this Fluttermane in enough time.
Yeah, well, we're actually going to see a Terrasilize. It's going to be from the Iron Hand still. It is going to be that Terrifier. So maybe Aaron thinking a little bit differently here now. It's really interesting because like now your Gyarados is in that awkward spot where like it is at that -1 instead. But Fluttermane going for that Dazzling Gleam is going to be able to get some okay damage on both of these. This Thunder Wave from that Gyarados is going to land into that Corviknight. This bird's going to have to be forced to slow down. Has to worry about those paralysis turns. And Thunder Punch here from that Iron Hand does a lot of damage into Fluttermane, as Corviknight finishes off this turn with a Brave Bird, does very little damage into the Iron Hands, and is actually hit by recoil damage here, but he's going to be paralyzed.
Yeah, so obviously if you look at just like the pure HP value of it, it looks like Alberto got the worst that turn, but crucially he was able to burn the Terra from Aaron, and now you know that the Iron Hands is going to be a fire type, right? And that does change a bit about how you play it. It means that Garchomp can lock into Rock Slide freely against it and know it's going to be able to get some consistent value in. And it also means that you don't need to worry about like a Chew or something, or a Tinglu changing types later on. But Aaron is kind of in the driver's seat now, and Alberto's going to need to have to reposition to try to get something going, and he can't just like let both of his Pokemon die.
Yeah, so Garchomp actually going to switch out for that Corviknight here is going to be on the battlefield. As Fluttermane goes for another Dazzling Gleam, is able to get the Iron Hands down to about half health here. Gyarados though going to clean up the remainder of Fluttermane's HP with a Waterfall. Is going to be able to knock it out. Doesn't even have to worry about the fact that it's at -1 into its attack. So Garchomp here does get in extremely free because it does it completely ignore that Thunder Punch from the Iron Hand. So Fluttermane does go down this turn, but Alberto able to at least bring in that Roaring Moon, or maybe the Corviknight again, right? It has a couple of options available to him.
And Alberto's taking his time here because this is really like, you're deciding now what you're going to win with. Alberto, in order to like be in a chance to win this game, needs to basically be able to pick up 2 KOs before Aaron is able to pick up the next one. Alberto is going to be trying to go for a sweep with that Scarf Garchomp and set up Tailwind with that Roaring Moon to outrun everything on Aaron's side.
Yeah, so Roaring Moon's Photosynthesis did activate, so Acrobatics also did more. I also think it's funny that you're saying a sweep, because I think his username is sometimes it's Cali Sweeper, so you know, it is in the name.
I refuse to believe that anyone calls him that. I wonder,
No,
like,
absolutely not.
but I mean, that's part of it, right? Is the Gyarados, because it's on the field, means that it needs to switch out and then switch back in order to get Intimidate off. And by the time you've done that, Alberto's going to be able to deal a lot of damage. And so it's like, Alberto kind of has free reign, getting both of these Pokemon to half. You don't mind the Flutter Mane's fainted.
Yeah, and so no switch out from the Gyarados as Iron Hands goes down just from the Stomping Tantrum here from that Guard Chomp. Did take some damage earlier on thanks to those Dazzling Gleams of the Brave Bird. No more Terrasilize here from Aaron, but still an Alberto's not able to do so. As Throat Chop from Roaring Moon is actually able to pick up another knockout on Gyarados. So these two powerhouses able to pick up 2 knockouts on this turn, leaving Aaron to his last 2 Pokemon.
Yeah, and if you're Aaron there, it's so hard, right? Because you're so worried about Alberto reading a switch and, okay, they faint, and then you're bringing it back up, and it's half health anyways. It's just so hard. And you're just kind of hoping that Alberto slips, tries to get greedy with a Tailwind or something. And crucially, Alberto didn't even commit a Terra there.
Nope. Yeah, and Flutter Mane's speed is heightened thanks to that throat since this is that booster energy. But Chi and Flutter Mane kind of stand then 2 Titans out of Alberto's team, and no damage done onto them because their combats beforehand were unable to land any hits.
Yeah, and this is Choice Specs Chi-Yu, so it can't protect, and because the Terra Fire was burned early, it can't turn into a water type to live the Stomping Tantrum. So instead, that's going to be a guaranteed knockout onto it, and Alberto just had everything lined up, and giving that early on meant that Alberto was able to like get a lot more pressure in this later game.
Yeah, it's kind of wild how like sometimes the defensive Terras or like those Terra types just don't really do much for you. But Alberto's gonna say, hey, you know what? I still have access to it, so I am going to use it this time. It is going to be that Guard Chomp with that ground Terra. As if Guard Chomp wasn't terrifying enough, we're gonna add that extra damage into it. I'm having flashbacks to Scarf Chomp with you know that. But Moonblast is gonna eat that right up. Is gonna lose that Dragon typing here. Stomping Tantrum boosted by its Terrestrialization. This Chi-Yu is just gone for this world now. It's going to be swimming no more as it does get knocked out from that Stomping Tantrum, leaving this Roaring Moon to go for a Throat Chop into the Flutter Mane and picks up, oh my god, I was able to pick up that knockout.
Yeah, and that's such a hard game, right? Because if you're Aaron, you're probably feeling those early turns, right? You're doing everything right. You're making forward progress in the position. But all it took was Alberto to just say, I'm going to set it up so that Roaring Moon Guard Chomp wins. No, your Gyarados is on the field instead of off the field, so you don't have enough to deal with it. And even if you switched it out, right, like then, okay, your Chi-Yu or your Flutter Mane goes down.
Yeah, it's kind of wild because I think that, like you pointed out, that early Terrestrialization where Aaron, I guess, maybe sort of felt forced to have to go for the like Terrestrialization on the Iron Hands makes it really rough because like all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, cool, now this is a target, and as soon as I get these like knocked out, like sure you paralyzed my Corviknight, sure you knocked out my Flutter Mane, but these are the 2 Pokemon that I just need to like to get rid of everything else, and the fact that you gave this Garchomp a free target makes all the difference in the world.
Right, and I mean, so part of this too, right, is Alberto has been using this team or something so similar to it for so long that he innately knows all of the lines. Alberto is very comfortable like looking at the situation and understanding like, okay, probably have Chi-Yu Flutter Mane back, so if I do this, then I can just cleanly win. And he probably saw that whole end game sequence from the moment that he switched in Garchomp. And it's just like, that's the thing, right? Like, Aaron doesn't have the familiarity in this matchup because you're not going to get a lot of good practice against Klefki Corviknight players.
Oh, you don't play against that much? And I think it's like really rough too, right? Because at the same time, it's like, how do you end up following up things like, okay, I paralyze this, I knock this out, and if you don't really have like that manpower, especially because that Gyarados is probably one of your best ways to negate any sort of damage.
I think what it needs to be is Aaron needs to like be more conservative with the Gyarados, so either keep it in back or don't bring it at all, because Gyarados needed to switch in onto the field to reduce the attack of the physical attackers. Instead, it got 0 value out of that Intimidate, and instead just clicked Thunderwave, then fainted, and it's just like, you need to get more value out of it.
It did technically knock out the Flutter Mane with Waterfall. Technically.
Unlike Breeze could have knocked out that Flutter Mane at that point.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think it's just rough because, like, you know, I feel like treating Gyarados as a pivot Pokemon as like it's like your knockoff Incineroar because you don't have Incineroar at home anymore. So, but Iron Hands and Chi-Yu, so a bit of a switch here from Aaron, but the same lead from game 1 here with Alberto is going to be that Corviknight and Flutter Mane once again. Iron Hands still staying on the field, but Chi-Yu going to be there instead of that Gyarados.
Yeah, I like this adjustment, right? Like, keep the Gyarados in back. And, I mean, Chi-Yu, this is going to be the most value you get out of it, right? It's innately a Chi-Yu Fire move staring down the Corviknight. And Yeah, Alberto can Terra his Corviknight into whatever type, Terra Fire, but if he does that, that means he doesn't have a Terra later. It's like, and that end game, if Alberto wasn't able to Terra Garchomp, then Aaron would have won. So you're fine Heat Waving, even if it's Terra Fire, as long as you force out something, like force some concession from Alberto.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder if like you leave the Gyarados because you're thinking, okay, I need it for the later game, right? And that sort of like I need to make sure the Garchomp doesn't have that much damage here. We are gonna get a Terastallization actually on turn 1, and I want to say that is going to be from Aaron's side. No, it's actually gonna be the Corviknight. So the Corviknight is gonna get the Fire Terra here because it says, "Hey Chew, those flamethrowers. I'm not a big fan of them, and I don't want to have to take super effective damage from it. So it's going to have to."
Both Terra.
Double Terra turn 1 is going to go into that Iron Hand. So we're turning up the heat here with the double Fire Terastallization. Well, I think they're both Steel types too, right? There's a Steel joke in there somewhere.
Iron Hands is not a Steel
Oh, it's
type.
not? Oh my god.
It's electric fighting.
It's electric. Look, it's been a really long time since I played this. Since, you know, I have
Dazzling
like,
Gleam did so little.
Oh,
No,
god.
the Wave dodge.
The Fluttermane avoiding that, and Corviknight just says, hey, I'm one of you now, so I don't take much from that. But Chiyu is able to survive a body press from there, as well as Thunder Punch from the Iron Hands. Does a lot of damage to that Fluttermane. That Heat Wave dodge actually matters for that Fluttermane.
Yeah, it matters so much, right? Because Fluttermane, obviously strong Pokemon, fast one can get a hit off, but it's also annoying because you want to get rid of it, but it could also protect. And then it's like, then that Heat Wave miss means that you're missing multiple moves into it with the Protect too, potentially. And it's just like, that's just hard to deal with mentally, because at the back of my mind, it's like, if I just hit Heat Wave here, it could have been such an easier game.
But are you really a VGC player if you don't miss a Heat Wave at least like one point in your life when you really need it to hit?
You're not a VGC player if you don't complain about it.
Ah, that's true. Okay, yeah, that's fair. I mean, honestly, like sometimes it's like one of those things where it's like, oh, every time you click those moves, you're always just like, I win unless this happens, right?
Yeah.
And Fluttermane, because it survived, was able to dodge that Heat Wave, is able to land its Dazzling Gleam. No misses here from that Fluttermane as Chiyu goes down on this turn. Corviknight taking this time to go for a bulk up, so getting a boost in that attack and a boost in that defense, and is like, I'm gonna be more of a nuisance than you thought before. Iron Hand's going for the Dream Punch.
That's a crit.
Yeah, manages to get a critical hit, so Hay makes up a little bit for that miss with that Heat Wave on the Fluttermane. Is able to get back some considerable health here, forcing the Corviknight to actually chomp down on its berry. That bulk up that it managed to do was just like, yeah, we're just gonna ignore that, and that critical hit is going to just get that Iron Hands back almost to full HP.
Yeah, I mean, crucially though, because the Chiyu is knocked out, that means that Aaron has a lot less positions. We're talking about that, the fact that the Gyarados needs to come in on the Garchomp in the Roaring Moon. But the thing is, if that means that if the Gyarados isn't coming in, that means the Fluttermane has to come in. And the Fluttermane is just like, you want to get more value out of it because it will get knocked out by the +1 Brave Bird potentially. And it's just like, yeah, you need the Gyarados, but you also desperately need the Fluttermane, especially knowing the fact that they're not going to be able to Terra and that Dazzling Gleam will be able to knock out both. So it's like, okay, Gyarados, you have to be useful here.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a rock and a hard place, right? Like, you really have to figure out which Pokemon you're okay sending in here. And like you said, that Gyarados was the choice for Aaron. And like before, that Corviknight just right back at it and went and said, hey, that Intimidate, now it's going back into that Gyarados. So it is going to be coming into this field at a -1, while that Corviknight is still at that, like, a +1 from that bulk up.
Yeah. Now what Alberto is looking for here is he is trying to find end games where he knows the Fluttermane is probably in the back, where he can just comfortably say, like, I don't care that you can Dazzling Gleam and Moonblast, I have enough bulk in order to win. So what that means is like preserving HP on the Garchomp, or getting Tailwind up with Roaring Moon, or having Corviknight at enough HP to not make to a Dazzling Gleam.
And this Fluttermane is actually going to get switched out as a very low HP, but that Garchomp coming into play here beside that Corviknight. That Corviknight, just like game 1, is going to have to take that Thunder away from that Gyarados. It's going to be paralyzed now for the rest of this game. Iron Hand's going for a Sword Stance. On this turn is going to try to bulk itself up as well with a +2 attack. And that Thunder Wave already showing off what it can do, as Corviknight is paralyzed on this turn, leaving this Corviknight unable to go for that move.
That's such a timely switch by the Garchomp there, right? Because you expect the Fluttermane, right? Because it's not going to be useful later. You kind of assume it's going to stay on the field. But Alberto knows that if he keeps the Fluttermane in, right, it's not going to be doing that much with like a weak Moonblast relatively, right? Because it's just Sash. And Aaron is trying to take advantage of that, set up the Sword Stance. So Alberto's like, no, I can get in this safely. The worst case scenario is I get water fault. I can handle that. Instead, I'm going to go for rock slide up, and I'm going to get value out here.
Yep, and so Garchomp able to go for that rock slide as a rough skin going to punish the waterfall that just happened from the Gyarados, but it's going to put that Gyarados in that range to chomp down on that berry, get back some of that health that it's been losing slowly. So Citrus Berry going to get back that health. Iron Hands going for a Drain Punch, so no flinches from either side here, and Iron Hands, thanks to that Swords Dance, is able to go back all the almost up to full, but it does a lot of damage into that Garchomp, but Garchomp going to retaliate with that rough skin ability. But Brave Bird here from Corviknight, so breaking through that paralysis, is able to knock back that Iron Hands down to about half health. But the Garchomp and the Corviknight looking a little bit worse for wear than they were a turn ago.
Yeah, and I mean, pretty critically here is that you're losing all of that HP on the Garchomp, right? And it's kind of getting to a point where, like we were saying, you need to find an end game that you the Flutter Mane later. And if Garchomp goes down, right? Let's say you just trade everything. Garchomp goes down, you knock out the Gyarados. Flutter Mane's going to be able to come in. It's going to be able to outrun and knock out everything. And that's not a winning endgame for Alberto, and he knows it. He's wondering how he can get out of this. If he can, like, preserve the Corviknight or the Garchomp or something.
Yeah, I think it's also just kind of rough because then you also have to bang on the fact that hopefully the paralysis doesn't kick in and like stop your Corviknight either, right? So we are gonna get a detect here from Iron Hands, is going to protect itself on this turn, and as actually Garchomp goes for another Rock Slide, is not going to connect with that Iron Hands obviously because it just used detect here, but is going to be able to connect with that Gyarados, is going to get knocked down to under half. Gets the Rock Slide flinch. Remember, where there's a flinch, there's a wave, but Corviknight returning and saying, hey, if that Garchomp, if that Gyarados isn't moving, neither am I. As that paralysis kicks in again.
Yeah, I mean, what everyone is trying to do there, right, is almost like if you KO the Garchomp, you kind of enter something lining, or you're just trying to knock out like one of your own Pokemon, right? You get a Waterfall off onto the Corviknight, that's also so big. And it's just like, you just want one of these Pokemon. Like, if there was a self-destruct button you could press to bring in the Flutter Mane, Aaron would be smashing that thing right now.
Yeah, that's kind of wild that like both of those like secondary effects just taking place like immediately. It's so interesting to me whenever like paralysis happens because it always feels like it should be such a low chance, and I feel like we see it more often than that. But
I mean, like, that's the thing. Part of the reason that Alberto opted to lock into Rock Slide, right, is yes, it's double super effective, but also he understands that these Rock Slide flinches can happen and they can swing the game. And went for Rock Slide 3 times. Statistically, he's like, more likely than not to get one of them.
Yeah, so Garchomp actually leaving the field here, also very low HP as Roaring Moon comes into the field, activates that booster energy. Corviknight actually also switching out, so a double switch from Alberto. That Flutter Mane coming back onto that field, that Flutter Mane that was very low in the red, as Gyarados goes for a Waterfall, is going to knock out that Flutter Mane. So that Flutter Mane saying,
this play,
hey,
because you just run into the Waterfall and you just run into the Drain Punch, going to knock out that Roaring Moon.
Oof, yeah, so a double switch and a double knockout for Alberto, so punished heavily for like having both of those out. And you also lose the bulk up that you had on the Corviknight as well, and it's still paralyzed, and this Garchomp is still a little bit worse for wear in terms of that HP.
Yeah, and with that double switch, it's like we're back in the same spot. It's not like anything changed there. Like, and what's hard is that it was kind of difficult to see what other move Aaron was going to go for there. Right? Like, it's like, I'm not sure what Alberto was reading, but, like, it wasn't happening, and Aaron was just always going to go for the simple attacks, try to get one knockout, try to keep one alive, bring in the Flutter Mane. And I think that Alberto recognized that that endgame was so tough that he was just trying to make something happen. So even though he's up 4v3,
yeah, so this Iron Hands is going to go ahead and go for that detect again. The Garchomp going to lock itself into Rock Slide here, not going to hit the Iron Hands again. Is going to connect with that Gyarados and is able to pick up the knockout here on that Gyarados. So that's one less threat that I guess he has to worry about here. But that Corviknight is now going to take a moment to go ahead and roost, get back a lot of that HP that it lost over the course of the game. Still has to worry about the paralysis kicking in every now and then, but it's in the green, so it is a little bit of a better spot. But that Iron Hands is still at +2.
It's still at +2. This Flutter Mane is going to be faster thanks to its booster speed. The Garchomp can't protect. And the thing is that, yeah, it's that green, but you're not going to win this 1v1 against the Iron Hands, and Flutter Mane is going to be able to knock out the Garchomp, and Alberto's just run out of options here, and now all he can really do is think about how he wants to approach Game 3.
Yeah, it feels like the writing's like somewhat on the wall here, right? Like the Flutter Mane is just like, oh, you've got a Garchomp that I can just get rid of, and like the Iron Hands being able to set up and not being like kind of pressured down into is a little bit rough. So Dazzling Gleam here from that Flutter Mane is going to connect into both. Not going to do much damage on Corviknight, but it's not really going to matter because it's very typical for this Corviknight, I think, to have a 1v2 situation here. As this Iron Hands is able to go for another Drain Punch, does a considerable amount of damage into that Corviknight. So just an easy like sort of team up for Aaron's Pokemon to really just be able to knock it out. As Corviknight rounds out this turn with a Brave Bird and barely gets the Fluttermane to half HP.
Yeah, I mean, that's important for Alberto to know, right? He can feel like, okay, +1, Corviknight will knock it out. He probably has a rough idea of the bulk on it, so he's just trying to get information at some point here. And what I think is crazy to think about for this entire game is if you think about where Alberto went wrong, I think you could argue it was because he I would think, well, the double switch was bad, but the reason he had to do that, right, was because he Terrafired the Corviknight early. He had a Roaring Moon and a Garchomp, and that would have to stare down a Fluttermane in the end game.
What's kind of funny too is like that's the same sort of reason I think we think that Aaron probably lost that game was he Terrified too early, and like Alberto is sort of mirroring that in game too.
Yeah, and the thing is it's like, at least with Terrifying the Iron Hands, right? Like, Iron Hands is doing stuff. You're throwing out the Drain Punches. You're doing very strong stuff. That Corviknight did so little that entire game beyond just, like, take hits, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, you almost wonder if just, like, anything else would have been better for Alberto there, because you're not even using it as an Earthquake marker at that point.
Yeah, because the Garchomp had to lock itself into Rock Slide because of the Gyarados, yeah. So that's actually an interesting point to make, because I think when you're looking at it, right, having the Garchomp and the Roaring Moon next to each other, but then being able to Terrastallize either one of those two puts you in such a better position as Alberto, because I think you give yourself a little bit more freedom in terms of moves, especially because you have to lock yourself into something with that Garchomp.
Right, and it's just a matter of, like, keeping something around for those endgames, right? Like, it sounds weird to say this, like we were playing for the end game the whole time, but you kind of have to be, because Fluttermane is just such a strong end game Pokemon. It can trade damage so well. They kind of need to be prepared for it, and it wouldn't surprise me if Alberto kind of went back to the drawing board a little bit here.
I mean, honestly, like his sort of game one plan was really nice, right? Like I even think like that double switch was kind of like an interesting choice, because your Roaring Moon just sort of goes down for no reason, and I feel like you sort of need that like at the end, especially because you get a boost in that speed for it. So maybe the fact that like you don't have access to like the Terastallization might have just been like, okay,
yeah, exactly. But like, credit to Aaron there, right? Because the reason that all this series events start off was because Aaron recognized that he needed to lead the Chi-Yu in order to get value out of it. And that's exactly what happened, and that's what caused Alberto to need to Terra Fire and Snowball from there, and that's exactly why we see the change in leads from Alberto.
Oh, so the Fluttermane and the Garchomp here, as Gyarados comes back on the field for the lead here, with Chi-Yu is able to finally find a good Intimidate target into that Garchomp.
Yeah, I think this is Aaron like understanding that that's probably the adjustment that Alberto's going to make, so he's able to finally get value out of that Gyarados, and now it's a pretty different story, right? Like, yes, Alberto can just go for the Dazzling Gleam and the Rock Slide, but it's not so easy, because Aaron can still Terra his Chi-Yu if he wants to, or can potentially like tear the Gyarados, get a Thunder Wave off or something, slow play it, and it's just that it's hard for Alberto to cover for everything.
Yeah, and actually what we're gonna have is a switch from that Chi-Yu into a Moongus, so one tiny Pokemon for another here, as Rock Slide from Garchomp is gonna be the move of choice it's gonna lock into, is going to double down into both of those. Dazzling Gleam is another spread move we've got here, is going to activate that barrier on that Gyarados was able to get a half health immediately, and Amoonguss is gonna have to take some damage for its troubles of switching in here. That Gyarados though able to get to that Thunder Wave, not just shrugging off that Rock Slide potential for flinch, and Fluttermane in a really rough spot because it is going to get paralyzed on this turn, and this Amoonguss getting in relatively unscathed did have to take a little bit of damage.
Yeah, but I mean, and also the thing is too, right, like Gyarados is taking this damage, you don't really care as long as Amoonguss is able to get off that Pollen Pelt, and I really like this adjustment from Aaron's end of things. I think he kind of realized that Alberto was able to set up these lines into him that were very uncomfortable, right? Because he didn't have the switching or the maneuverability. So Alberto can say, this is exactly what this endgame is going to be. And now Aaron with the Amoonguss, it makes it so you can't calculate everything. You have to deal with all of that bulk, and you have to deal with this Rage Powder. No flinches again, though.
Yeah, and so the double Rock Slide here. Oh, there is a flinch, though. Gavin spoke too soon a little bit on that, because the Waterfall did flinch the Fluttermane, but on this end, so on this last move now, this Amoonguss is able to put that Garchomp to sleep. So double status afflictions here for Alberto. Just Aaron really just understanding what happened in Game 1 and Game 2, and really just sort of like accelerating.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like using the extra bulk that he has on this team to his advantage, because Game 1, it didn't feel for game 2, it didn't feel like Aaron had the bulkier team, right? Even though he does. He has all of these defensive tools, but you didn't feel any of them. But now with the Amoonguss as kind of the maestro to all of it, you can feel all of that bulk. You can feel 50% coming back into this game.
Yeah, and this Garchomp stays is going to take that necessary sleep turn as that Fluttermane did switch out for that Corviknight. Gyarados going for another Waterfall is going to do a little bit of damage to that Corviknight, but Corviknight beats it up pretty well. And now Amoonguss is going to take this time to go ahead and heal up. Its partner is going to get it back almost to full health. So like you said, Gyarados doesn't care how much damage it takes because Pollen Puff is here to save the day for that Gyarados.
Yeah, and this is where Corviknight, this is where you finally see the value of it. Corviknight is here in order to deal with the Amoonguss. You're either going to Brave Bird it, knock it out, or you're going to force the Terrestrialization. And there is a bit of that read there, right? Like you assume that it's going to Terra anyways and go for a bulk up or something on top of that. But it's here to put on that pressure.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting having the terrestrialization as an option, right? Because all of a sudden, defensive Terra typing, I think, has just always been my favorite thing about terrestrializing. Right. Like, all of a sudden, you can cover for some of these and add in some mind games. And we are going to see a terrestrialize from Aaron's side. Is going to be that Amoonguss is going to get the defensive Terra typing. He's going to be that water Terra. So Amoonguss is saying, hey, that Brave Bird, not going to do as much damage as you thought it was going to do before. And you are going to have the Garchomp wake up on the turn, so that turn one wake up is going to be able to go for the Rock Slide again, does some damage here onto that Gyarados and then Amoonguss, and gets a flinch this time into that Gyarados, so Corviknight free to go for that Brave Bird here, gets that Amoonguss down a little bit more. He's going to get hurt by Rocky Helmet, so no Berry is going to also have to take recoil damage, and that's going to be a little bit of a good turn, actually a lot better turn for Alberto than I think he was ever kind of expecting, right?
Yeah, and oh my god,
he gets a flinch with the Brave Bird too. This is oh my god, that was a fantastic turn for Alberto. Double flinches from both of these moves.
Yeah, the double Rock Slide flinch there is just like insane. Because I mean, if you're Aaron there, right, the reason you go for the Terra Water there is because it feels like you're relatively up. That Fluttermane is useless in back. That Garchomp is sleeping, so you're fine Terra Watering, even if it's a little telegraphed, to go for the Spore because it's guaranteed. Except not if Alberto's Garchomp has anything to say about it. It's just double Rock Sliding, locking it in, and it's just. Oh,
that's what it's been so long since I've seen a double flinch from all of that stuff. Like that's so that's so demoralizing sometimes because you're in such a good spot with that. Garchomp says, hey, you know what, don't forget that Scarf Garchomp is still scary, but Gyarados is able to break through that, is going to be able to get that Thunder Wave down into that Corviknight and say, hey, I ignore that now.
It feels like kind of revenge, right?
Yeah, so Amoonguss says, you know what, I don't like you when you're awake, you're going back to sleep here.
No. Oh my god. And then
oof. Hey, you know what? At least this Amoonguss gets knocked out by this Brave Bird. It was at least able to put down that Garchomp to sleep again, right? As it's sort of like last Hail Mary.
Yeah, because if you're Alberto, right, it's like you could argue that this interaction wasn't so great compared to, like, let's say you get the damage down on it, and then like you can have the Garchomp awake for when it needs to be. But now the Garchomp is asleep, and it's guaranteed to have another sleep turn. That means that Aaron has one free turn to do whatever he wants, and Alberto isn't going to be able to switch it in and then put pressure out later. It's that Alberto needs to burn the sleep now, and that next to the Corviknight that can't protect, it means that Aaron is just trying to figure out how he can do as much as possible with the opportunity given.
Yeah, especially because, like, you know, now you don't have to worry about the Rock Slide flinches. The Fluttermane, actually a fantastic choice here to bring out now. Fluttermane at this full health is going to get that boost as well from that booster energy. We know that it was that speed from earlier. Yeah, sure, Corviknight is sort of like a little bit of a pain, but it's also been paralyzed here. So Gyarados and Fluttermane actually really sort of having just kind of control of the field. They're saying, yeah, we can do what we want. There's not a lot you can do to punish it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one thing though, the one thing that Alberto has is he has his Terra. And this game is going to come down to how Alberto is going to use his Terra, right? Because, yeah, you don't want the Garchomp to go down here, but you might have to let it in order to make sure that you get value out of, say, like a Terra on the Roaring Moon or something, right? And to be able to line up and live a hit so that you can hit the Chi-Yu later. And it's so rough because, like, yes, Aaron's down a Pokemon. Yes, Aaron's down a Terra. But in this position, Alberto just has nothing going for him.
Yeah, especially because two of his Pokemon are paralyzed, and he has to worry about the third one, which is asleep. It's actually going to be switched out. So Garchomp saying, all right, I'm going to get out of here. As Fluttermane, the paralyzed Fluttermane from earlier is going to come back onto the field. And actually a switch from Aaron so that Gyarados with that Intimidate going to be really good for him later. Chi-Yu coming out onto that field and is like, hey, I'm back, everybody. I hope you missed me. As Beast of Ruin is also going to lower the special defense. And Fluttermane saying, I'm going to take advantage of this. We're going to get that Dazzling Gleam now. And Corviknight, even with that super effective damage, is still going to take some decent damage here. And does have, yeah, I was going to say, does have to worry about the paralysis, is unable to break through this turn. I think he had clicked Roost that turn, so that would have been a perfect time for him to like recover all of that HP, and is unable to do so.
Yeah, that would have been so big. And now it's so hard because, yeah, you can tear your Roaring Moon to live the hit, but then you run into a question of, like, yeah, like, the Flutter Mane is going to take a while to knock out potentially. And also that she is there, it's like, yeah, you get the Roaring Moon in a strong spot, but the Corviknight's at no HP. It's not going to be useful. The Garchomp's asleep. It's not going to be useful, and it's like, you have to trust Roaring Moon to 1v3 essentially with the Gyarados in back that's just going to be able to get an Intimidate off onto it.
Yeah, it's like a really rough spot here for Alberto, right? Like those Thunder Waves like pay off more than you can imagine as they happen later in later turns, because then like good moves, good plays suddenly become like really rough for you to just sort of recover from. And Alberto's actually going to take this time down to use his Terastallization on that Roaring Moon, is going to get that Terra flying. So I think that since this was a turn that it switched in, it is going to be able to get that boost with the Acrobatics. That booster energy as well. Flutter Mane though going for a Moonblast straight into that Roaring Moon does a lot of damage in there, as Roaring Moon goes for that Acrobatics. Is going to be boosted as well by its Terastallization, and she was going to get knocked out here from that Acrobatics. Does have to take a lot of damage from that Flutter Mane though in return, and Corviknight going to opt for a Roost here, so it's going to at least finally able to recover a lot of that HP that it had lost earlier.
Right, and now Alberto is up 3v2, and what you can try to do here for pressure is just say like, hey, you kind of need to attack this Roaring Moon, right? But I could protect. Maybe there's a situation, right, where it's like you waste your time attacking the Roaring Moon, you don't Shadow Ball the Corviknight, and then I just hit the Flutter Mane twice with Brave Bird, and I'm able to win this game still. So Alberto still has a little bit of that mind game up his sleeve.
Yeah, and it's kind of rough too, because like, you know, the Gyarados is always in the spot where all 3 games it's had to switch it into this Corviknight and take the -1 for itself. So not really the ideal position for this Gyarados in this moment against that Corviknight. But this Flutter Mane at least can maybe try to knock something out. Won't be that Roaring Moon though. Roaring Moon goes for the Protect on this turn. He's gonna say, hey, I'm protecting right now. As Flutter Mane goes for the Moonblast move into that protected spot. Is gonna be unable to pick up a knockout, as Gyarados actually goes for a Waterfall into the Corviknight spot.
Flinch.
You have a Paralyze or you have a Flinch. Oh, breaks through both of those, is able to get a Brave Bird down into that Flutter Mane. Does a decent amount of damage, and that is going to take recoil damage here. But now you're kind of still in that sort of same spot as before.
Yeah, now if Alberto wants to get through this, he's going to need to do that exact same thing again.
He has to hope for no Paraflinch this time.
Yeah, he's going to need to not get Paraflinch twice in a row, and then knock out the Flutter Mane. If he's able to do that, he's going to be able to win the game. But that's just so hard to do.
All right, here we go. So that Moonblast from that Flutter Mane going into that Roaring Moon, that critical hit doesn't matter. It's just like an icing for Flutter Moon on top of this like cake, right? It's just saying, hey, I'm going to knock you out. I'm going to knock you out extra hard here. As Gyarados goes for the Waterfall, there is that flinch chance and the paralysis chance here if that Corviknight is able to break through both of those, pick up a knockout here on that Flutter Mane, leaving that Garchomp that was in the back, and this Corviknight now to deal with this Gyarados, who would have liked to see maybe I forgot Garchomp is still asleep though, but still, like, you know, you're still in a really good spot with both of these.
Yeah, and it's so difficult for Aaron to even knock out this Garchomp because, yeah, you have Waterfall, but every Waterfall you do is going to do around as much damage to yourself, and it's just going to be so difficult for Alberto to lose this. He just needs to wake up eventually, and I think we might see Alberto in finals again. Waterfall going to do 40 HP, but look at how much damage.
Yeah, that rough skin is big. Corviknight can't move because it's paralyzed. Did go for a Roost, but not really worrisome because Aaron's big problem here is that Garchomp. Once that Garchomp wakes up, it's just game over for the Gyarados. Garchomp staying asleep on this turn, so Aaron's still in it just a little bit longer. Waterfall from that Gyarados going into the Garchomp, but again, you're taking some more of that chip damage. I mean, if you manage to get a flinch here somehow, right? But Brave Bird from that Corviknight is able to pick up the knockout here with that Gyarados that was in the red. So really, those Waterfalls actually hurting him in the end with like all that rough skin.
Yeah, and you gotta feel for Aaron there, right? Because that game 3, it felt like he was doing everything right. He got the defensive setup up, right? Like, he had the Amoonguss, he got everything to sleep, he was ready to Pollen Puff, but Alberto's Garchomp said no.
No, double flinches. Everybody forgot about what it was like to feel double flinch? No. I mean, because, you know, like, part of that is, like, whenever you see your opponent click Rock Slide, like, we always joke, like, where there's a flinch, there's a way, right? So when there's a Rock Slide, there's a way. And seeing, I cannot tell you the flashbacks and, like, the PTSD I just felt from, like, watching a double flinch happen with a Scarf Garchomp. And it's just, like, being able to see that again and just being like, okay, I think that's part of like the downside sometimes for Pokemon. Like I understand like the RNG aspect of it, but sometimes it's so rough to do everything right.
The way that Alberto's team is structured, right, is he is saying that he will eventually get Rock Slide flinches, and he is setting up his team so that when he does, he can set up on them. That's why you have the Rock Slide next to a bulky Pokemon like the Corviknight, because the Corviknight can continuously just use Roost and make it so that, like, yeah, even if you hit it, yeah, you'll get it down eventually, but if I just get one flinch over 3 tries, then I can get in a good spot. Now, that to being said, that double flinch was egregious.
That was wild. Like, honestly, there was so many flinches in that, I just forgot what year we were playing for a second, because it was just like, you get a flinch, and you get a flinch, and everybody gets a flinch, so...
Yeah, and, I mean, also, it's like Aaron got himself into a solid spot at that end game. Like, the chance of moving through a Paraflinch is around 50%.
That was
just
wild.
Like, having Alberto having to fight through that twice too and just gets it both times is just like, that is
it's really fun to watch because the anticipation is part of the fun for us.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine sitting there and being like, oh my god, I just need you to like not get paralyzed and I need you to not get flinch, because it's like one of those where it's like, oh, if you get hit by a move and you wake up but you also have to worry about like flinching or paralyzed, and you're just like, the odds get worse and worse sometimes, and it just feels like the world's against you. But I mean, like, that was actually a really fantastic, like, sort of fun game to watch.
Yeah.
Like, going to game 3, especially like that, I just think it's funny how both of their losses